So thank you all so much for joining us for tonight's program. This is a big one. So Adam Haslett is skilled at examining the interior lives of characters in states of emotional extremes, whether they're dealing with anxiety, depression, loneliness, or mental illness, or facing homophobia or violence. He's the recipient of the Strauss Living Award from the American Academy of Arts and Letters and a Guggenheim Fellowship, among many other honors. He has written 3 previous books: the 2002 story collection, You Are Not a Stranger Here, which was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Award; the 2009 novel, Union Atlantic, which was winner of the Lambda Literary Award; and the 2016 novel, Imagine Me Gone, which was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize and National Book Critics Circle Award. And he's made us wait nearly 9 years, but his new book, Mothers and Sons, was published last week, and it will no doubt earn him even more nominations and awards. Mothers and Sons has already received starred reviews in Library Journal, Publishers Weekly, and Booklist, and that's the trifecta. You can't do any better than that. So congrats, Adam, on the book's early success, and thanks so much for being here tonight.
Well, thank you, Robert, for having me, and welcome to everybody who's watching through the various libraries. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, so we'll have a conversation for approximately 40 minutes, and then I'll take approximately 15 minutes of questions from the audience. And so my first handful of questions will revolve around the main characters and plot of Monsters and Sons to sort of introduce the viewers to the story. So first, can you tell us about your protagonist, Peter? I'll ask about Anne next, but what should viewers know about Peter?
Sure. So Peter is an immigration lawyer who lives in New York City. He works at a small nonprofit law firm, where he represents mainly asylum clients. So these are people who are seeking asylum in the U.S., which is something we read about all the time in the news, and is obviously a very current issue. He is, I would say, a workaholic. He's someone who's obsessed. Obsessed is the wrong word. Does work to the exclusion of almost everything else. He is, I would say, buried in his work. And the nature of being an asylum lawyer is that you have to spend a lot of time getting from your clients the stories of the things that may be the hardest things that ever happened to them. Because in order to get asylum, you have to have gone through things that put you in continued danger in the country you've come from. So we meet him at the beginning of the book in the courts, in the immigration courts where he's representing these people. And I spent a lot of time in those courts when I was preparing to write this book. And, what struck me is how casually and quickly these people's stories were dealt with, because it's a practical legal issue. What to us might be a very emotionally wrenching thing is more or less a factory, it's like a product. I mean, they're just, one person comes in, the next person comes in. I mean, it's very, and I try to capture some of that in the opening chapters of the book, the way in which it's not like we would imagine people's stories being handled. So Peter is someone who's lives in that world and is somewhat shut off from his own feelings and emotions, because he's really spending all of his time trying to help his clients.
And we'll talk more about the asylum laws in a moment. But so next, please introduce us to Peter's mom, Anne, and I'll ask you about their relationship next. But what should viewers know about Anne?
So Anne was a Episcopal minister, and that's when Peter was a boy and a teenager. That was her job, and they lived in the rectory of the church in Massachusetts, a fictional suburb of Boston. And then before her husband dies, she becomes aware of the fact that she's really actually interested in another woman. And this woman that she becomes involved with, and then eventually another friend, end up forming a kind of women's retreat center in Vermont, it has a spiritual bent to it, but it's not a religious organization. It's sort of a place for women who are looking for spiritual guidance and a sense of their own trajectory in life, to go and talk to one another and talk to these three friends. They describe it as a ministry of hospitality, and it's called Veriditas, which is a word from Hildegard von Bingen about renewal and evergreen kind of healing power. So she lives a life in the rural setting, very quiet, very full of meditation and contemplation. So very much in contrast to the world that her son is occupying.
Yeah. So what is the status of the relationship between Peter and Anne as your story begins? And without delving into any spoilers, can you broadly talk about why this is the case?
Sure. So they are not in much touch / estranged. There's a sister who's a third member of the family who's in more touch with both of them than they are with each other. So one of the questions of the book really is, why are they estranged? What is it that, Vermont and New York are not that far apart, even though she's in a pretty rural northern part of Vermont. It's not a kind of estrangement where they never, where it's bitter and there are no words exchanged, but they just don't spend any time together. The book alternates between these different points of view as you go forward through it, and they're sort of circling each other in ways that we'll probably get into. Yeah.
Now, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing any of these words here, any of these names. But so can you let the viewers know who is Vasil and why does his case have such a profound impact on Peter?
Sure. So I'm not Albanian, so I don't know whether it's Vasil or Vasil, but I say Vasil myself. So in any case, he's a young man who comes into the office. He's not originally Peter's client, but Peter ends up taking on his case, and he's a young gay guy who is making a claim for asylum based on his treatment in Albania for being gay. So it is one of the forms of asylum that has been, at least, it's still for now, recognized as a category of persecution that would qualify you for asylum in the US. And Albania, it's a complicated country, a lot of different, but in the rural parts of that northern part of that country, it's a very homophobic society. And so he has fled Albania, and he got in trouble in school because he had a crush on a boy, and there was a sort of relationship that was caught or seen by his brother and some of the kids at school. And so Peter's job as the asylum lawyer is to get his story from him. And he needs to get it at some point. He says, I whittle people's lives down into the shapes that the law can see. So it's not what a minister or a therapist might do, which is try to help the person understand themselves. It's, okay, I need you to give me X number of facts, and tell this story so that I can put it in a certain way that the court will understand. But the fact is that the story that Vasil has to tell Peter, in a way, breaks through his kind of numbness and the way that he's just buried himself in this work. And it strikes a chord in him that is sort of the engine of the book in many ways, because it sets him back in the memories of his own adolescence.
So to address some of the subplots and supporting characters in the book, what were you trying to do with some of the other child and mother relationships? So we had Vasil and his mother. We also had another of Peter's clients, Sandra, and her son. Anything the reader should take away from either of these relationships?
Well, yeah, there are a number of pairings in the book. I mean, of mothers and sons, right?
We're
So
going to get
there's
to a couple more. I only mentioned two, Peter. Adam.
okay.
There, I didn't. Adam, I
Oh,
got a couple more questions, but yeah.
sure. Yeah, so Sandra is one of the main clients, and she's fleeing gang violence, or did a while ago flee gang violence in Honduras.
Yeah.
And I think in my last book, it was a lot about characters who were struggling with mental illness, or what's defined as mental illness. One of the things that I often find myself doing, I'm actually only thinking about this as a talk right now, but is not just trying to get at the experience of a person, but the effect on families around them of that, whatever that issue might be. And here, as much as Sandra is a character, her son Philippe uh, is is terrified that his mother is going to be deported. So he's her kind of keeper. He wants to get her on schedule. He wants to keep her there. He's worried about what the judge thinks about her. Um, so I'm portraying a little bit of just a different variant on a mother-son relationship in which this kid is terrified about losing his mother. Um, and what was the other one pair you mentioned?
Yeah. So no. So it was Vasil and his mother, and Sandra and her
Yes,
son.
Basil. In the case of Basil, his mother is integral to how he's able to get out of Albania, and so that, and he has a certain amount of guilt about in the inverse. There, he has a certain amount of guilt about the fact that she's still there, and he's in the United States, and the way in which, because of the kind of culture, propriety, and shame around homosexuality, he feels as though his mother is still living with the implications of what's known about him.
Okay, now let's talk about some other mother-child relationships. I loved Liz, so Peter's sister. Fun character, provided great comic relief. I loved her rapport with both her mom and with Peter. So we have Liz and her toddler who is struggling with the toilet. And then on the flip side, albeit a very minor character, but I'm sure you do everything for a reason, we have Monica, one of Peter's colleagues, dealing with finding a caregiver for her aging mother. So anything you're trying to convey with Liz and her Monica as it relates to the mother-child relationship.
Sure, sure. Well, yeah. So Liz, Peter's sister, the main character's sister, has as you say, a toddler, and it is a lighter part of the story, which never hurts. And there is levity in the world, and so I don't want to, portray a world without any of it. And I think it really sort of brings Peter up short often because her humor is so direct.
Yes.
And he and his mother are both a little bit more formal and reserved. And she says whatever comes into her mind. And she's sort of raising her son the same way. He's slightly feral. And Peter observes this. And so often when you're writing, the most efficient and sometimes satisfying way to get at a character's way of being in the world is not to directly state it, but to see how they observe other people. And so a lot of the scenes of Liz and Charlie are of Peter observing how they are together. And I think this doesn't get a lot of development in the book, but I think by the end, there's also a kind of, he's a little bit glimpsing the life that he doesn't have, a kind of a relationship to a child and a kind of next generation sort of domestic life.
Yeah. And then anything about Monica? I know she's a very minor character.
I mean, yeah, she's a minor character, but a lot. I mean, a lot of my friends from law school are immigration lawyers, and so a lot of the immigration lawyers I spoke to talked about this too, which is that a lot of people in that line of work are working with people from the countries where they themselves came from. So an Albanian might well have an Albanian lawyer, and in the story, Monica she's from Nicaragua herself originally, and represents a lot of people from Central America. But she's also a hard bit lawyer. Like, she's kind of tough, and she's been around the block and seen a lot of stuff. And um, she and Peter relate as work colleagues. But yes, behind all that, of course, she's dealing with emotional realities of her own mother's care. So, yeah.
So I'm not going to ask about Susan and Jared's relationship. If you want that thread line, you have to read the book. But I did, so certainly not a mother, but I wanted to ask about Peter's father, Richard. So Richard is, homophobic. He's a Reagan Republican type of guy that walks to work regardless if it's raining or snowing or the extreme heat. He wants to show how tough he is, and he's telling his kids not to be such softies. Can you talk about the relationship that Peter has with his father, Richard, and how that it impacts him?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, to some extent, the marriage between his mother and father, they're an unlikely couple. They met in a very romantic way when Peter's father went to Europe to look for to go visit the battlefield where his own father had fought. And that's where he met Peter's mother. But I think the relationship between Peter and his father is not an unfamiliar one to many people. He's a somewhat more distant male figure, not as comfortable talking about his own emotions or his own history. And he has the sense that there's a class dynamic. He probably feels, I think he thinks that Anne belongs to a higher class than the one he was raised in. So that dynamic is playing out in the marriage. And to some extent, because where they're living in Massachusetts, and his mother, or his wife rather, the sense that the kids are more aligned with his wife than they are with him as a cultural matter. So Peter loves his father and sort of wants more from him in a sense. And is also often the case, he can get more of that when he's a boy, when he's young, because there's the kind of, it's an easier relationship with, but once he becomes an adolescent, it's just that much more complicated because the masculinity and identity and all these things. And I think on some level, you and I were talking about this a bit before, I think he senses that his son is gay, but doesn't know how to really cope with that.
Right. So I am going to give us a 30-second break here, and I'm going to read highlights of one of the starred reviews that Mothers and Daughters got. This review comes from Kirkus. Quote, a family in crisis story that keenly captures deep-seated fears and regrets. The strength of Haslett's storytelling is its deliberation, slowly peeling back the veneers of Peter's and Anne's professional accomplishments and cool public personas to reveal storms of guilt and fear. Haslett's sophisticated grasp of the ways that people over-police their feelings makes it a remarkably acute and effective character study. And that's a star review from Kirkus Reviews. Okay, so the next set of questions, we'll talk about some of the themes of the book. So sort of taking a broader look at things. So the first thing I did when I finished your book last night was I called my mother to do a check-in, okay? And she thought something might be wrong because I was calling after 9 o'clock, so I shouldn't do that. And then the second thing I did, and I'm still doing to this minute, is really taking an introspective look at my own childhood traumas and trying to evaluate ways in which they're still impacting my life 20, 30 years later. So do you hope that your book will make it easier for readers to confront unresolved issues in their own pasts and properly address any guilt or shame they may be carrying around stemming from incidents earlier in their lives?
Well, I'll just say as a writer, I'm delighted to know that you read my book and called your mother. Actually, I got a note this morning, an email from a dear friend who just finished the book, and he said something about not dissimilar from what you just said, which is that he felt a little differently about his relationship with his mother. You know, he sort of he was just going to visit her right after he finished the book, and he sort of said that he held her closer. I think, look, they're across so many different axes of relationships in families, friendships, marriages. There are these tenderly held but unsaid things, which once they're unsaid in the past, and then they continue to be, it's almost the amount of time they continue to be unsaid that has the most effect, right? And so this is the story about something which, you know, an event in the past, which is very disturbing and upsetting, but it was the way that it's handled in that moment gets solidified, and then that's the kind of path that eventually, you know, pulls the two of them apart in a way. So I mean, in anything I write, what I want is for the reader to spend time in the shoes of my characters. And I want people to have a space actually to slow down. So when I hear you also saying like you were thinking about and thinking through your own, you know, path, like that's very satisfying, because we live in a culture where everything is so sped up and we have so much information coming at us, so many demands on our attention, and you know, we're always busyness. It's just perpetual busyness with devices and phones and obligations. And hopefully what fiction can be is a space to stop and dwell and absorb yourself in something. And so I do think of myself as, in a way, kind of curating or creating a passage of experience for the reader that they can move through. And yeah, in some ways, it slows me down. It slows me down to write, because as you pointed out, it took me many years to write this. So, but I do like that idea that people are entering into reflection themselves because of absorbing themselves in other people's lives. I mean, that's why I think we read. That's why I was taught to read, and you know.
Yeah, I just started reading The Three Lives of Kate Kay this morning, but I'll tell you, Adam, I'm going to be thinking about your book for a long time. So this will be on my mind for more than 24 hours, believe me. So next question, next theme. So Peter is in his 40s and he's never had a committed relationship due to his unresolved childhood trauma. He's my word, he's a workaholic that doesn't really make time for his family or friends or love interests. I think he says a couple of times in the book, my life is my work. In a flashback, he has sex with a man for the first time. It's a casual, one-time hookup with a stranger, and he has no one to talk about the experience with afterwards. And he calls his sister, but decides not to tell her about it. And you have a line that stuck with me at the end of that scene. The line was, quote, "It's full of shame to be lonely." It's full of shame to be lonely. So what is your book trying to say about loneliness?
Well, thank you for that question. It's interesting. I think, do you have an advanced copy of the book?
Like I do not. So I don't have it on me, Adam. It's at my house.
I think, at least here, in my mind, that line actually now reads, in the copy edited final version, how shameful it is to be lonely. But I may be wrong. I may be.
Oh, did I mess up the line, Adam? Well, you knew what I meant. You knew what I meant.
I know what you meant. Yeah, you know what? I did want to explore loneliness in this book. I think, you know, as a person who is a gay man who grew up, came of age at the height of AIDS, I am, you know, the sense of alienation, or the tension between like desire and intimacy and sex and intimacy and all those things, was a very real one. And I'd written in a lot of my past work a certain amount about gay teens, and I've written a lot about like older people. I hadn't written a full character to my mind, either who was a lawyer or who was a kind of adult gay man wrestling with loneliness. And it's so, I think there's sort of micro generations in this instance, because in my lifetime, there's been no more dramatic civil rights story than gay rights, right? I mean, if you told me when I was in high school there was going to be gay marriage, I would have said I was the Pope. I mean, it's just, it didn't seem possible. So yeah, Peter, the book's set in 2011, and at that time he's 40 in the book, so it's roughly tracking the age I would have been at that time. So yeah, and I think there is, and look, the other, more broadly, putting aside the particularities of my experience, we're living in a time where more people live on their own than ever in the history of the country. And so I think a lot of people, regardless of sexuality, are, contending with isolation. And it's something that I think does bring shame. And that then it's more difficult for people to talk about, because it's something that, you shouldn't be, right? Everybody should be busy and friendly and seeing lots of people. But even if you have friends and family, the way our society is set up, there is a good deal of isolation.
No, agreed. So another theme of your book is, asylum and immigration law. And so, next week, I think we're going to see a lot of changes to our immigration and asylum laws. And so just curious, what does your book say about America's current asylum system? And what research did you do for this book as it relates to immigration law?
Yeah. Well, so as I mentioned, I went to law school many years ago. I never practiced as a lawyer, but a number of my friends after law school became immigration lawyers. And so I, sort of beginning in the early aughts, really had a kind of window into that world. And way, way before I ever conceived of this book, I did do some volunteering at immigration detention facilities, doing some intake work. And then mainly just through my friends, kind of tracked what was going on. And I think the thing that really kept interesting me about it was that, like a therapist or a minister or a social worker or even a close friend, what an asylum lawyer has to do is, as I was saying, really talk to people about the most difficult things in their life. It's just that they have to do it in this very structured form of being able to present a case to a court. So I also went then, once I was writing the book, to immigration court, which is open to the public. Anybody can go. Nobody does, but you can go. It's heart-wrenching stuff. And you see government lawyers cross-examining people who have been through these terrible things, and they're treating them like, witnesses in a criminal trial. A lot of people actually don't even have lawyers. So they're thrown into a system, particularly people who are crossing the border, or the southern border. Many of them don't have lawyers at all. You have a much better chance if you have a lawyer. As for the more explicit politics that you referred to, the fact of the matter is, obviously the system has been broken for decades. And, Obama, who was seeking an immigration deal, ended up deporting more people than any president in history. Biden has effectively closed down the asylum system before Trump got in. So the whole thing is so, the issue has become so toxic politically, that the system is being dramatically changed even before Trump gets into office. And obviously, what we're going to see is terrifying. I think more broadly, I would just say, look, I'm not an immigration expert. I'm not a policy, person. I mean, I think just from a humanitarian perspective, one of the things about this issue and why it's going to remain as central as any other issue in our culture is that we're living in a time of climate catastrophe, wars, water shortages. These things drive population shifts. There are more people There are more refugees in the world today than at any time since World War II. So these forces are larger than just our domestic politics. They've changed European politics. They're continuing to change European politics. As a writer, I wanted to get at some of the forces of the times we're living in. And specifically then, I will say, in the form of an immigration lawyer, I'm not someone who's had to go through seeking asylum. I wasn't going to write it from that point of view. But the people, and they're going to be only more on the front lines starting, next week. But the people in the trenches doing the work of immigration law are already kind of at a ragged edge. Do you know what I mean? They're already overworked people. I think when we think about civil society and resilience to that, it's really important to sort of think about the experiences of the people who are doing the work to try to help all of these people. So, yeah.
Adam, I appreciated your book didn't really have any villains per se. I mean, there was obviously like Fazl's brother and father and uncle and to a certain extent Peter's father, but you had empathy and sympathy for his health conditions and whatnot. But the one person I wanted to punch in the face was that government lawyer that tussled with Peter a couple times.
Yeah.
All right, so another heavy topic that is in the news. So yesterday, we saw the House of Representatives successfully pass a bill to ban trans athletes from playing women's sports, and there's certainly a very large anti-LGBTQ contingency in America, from homophobia to transphobia and everything in between. And I think your book speaks to the devastating, long-lasting impacts that this type of hate can have on its victims, particularly children and teens. So can you talk a little bit about what you were trying to convey about homophobia, both here in America, including suburban Massachusetts, where I'm sitting right now, and around the globe, including in places like Albania?
Yeah. I mean, it's a huge topic. I mean, I'll start at the very general and then maybe dial down. At the most general level, I think care and gentleness and emotion and love are difficult and disturbing states for many people. They make, like Peter's father, they make them uncomfortable. I think one of the appeals around the world to right-wing ideology is, in the strongman ideology, is this idea of crushing feeling, you know what I mean? Crushing subtlety, nuance, complexity. This is why things like universities and arts and the ambiguity of people being non-binary or trying to, come to understand themselves and their own gender, all these things actually rely on understanding and love and openness and compassion. And those aren't very effective ways to control people or to profit from them. So in the broadest sense, I think right-wing ideology always has to be against gender nonconformity of whatever kind it is, whether it's trans people or LGBTQ people, because it breaks the patriarchal order, right? I mean, it doesn't put men in charge of everything, and that's threatening. So unfortunately, I don't think it's a surprise. It's the same look at Russia. I mean, right, much of Putin's entire ideology, bizarrely enough, is to rally the nation around being anti-gay. So it's this very, very sad day. I mean, this is probably the first national retrenchment at the national level that we've seen in my lifetime on LGBTQ rights.
Yeah. So on a more positive note, so what do you feel is different about the bond between a mother and a son as opposed to, say, a father and a son or a mother and a daughter? What makes the mother-son relationship unique in your eyes?
Hmm. Well, talk about a big question. I what makes it unique? I mean, I think there's long been a sort of sense of like the cross gender um, relations in families between, fathers and daughters and mothers and sons. Um, there's a kind of difference built in um, that, but also perhaps ways in which it's easier. It can be easier because of that sameness isn't there. Um, but I don't know. I mean, part of me knew I was going to write about a mother and son, and a favorite book of mine is the Russian novelist Tugurniev's novel Fathers and Sons. And so the echo that I was sort of hearing in my head when I titled the book was that, which is also a story about kind of intergenerational incomprehension and a story about two friends, two young men. Um, so I'm avoiding your question because I don't know how to answer it. I mean, obviously, every relationship is different. I think, yeah, I don't know. I don't.
That's okay, Peter. That's all right. So now we'll
You called me
shift.
Peter. You called me Peter again.
All right. Well, we're going to have to keep a count of how often I call Adam Peter and Peter Adam. So we're going to shift gears, and I'm going to read you another review, and then I'm going to ask a different set of questions. And folks, please start getting your questions into the audience Q&A box. Greatly appreciated. So this review comes from Booklist. Booklist starred review. This deeply satisfying novel is a revelation, a thoughtful, psychologically acute, beautifully written examination of intersecting lives. The characters come alive on the page, commanding readers' attention. This novel is sure to receive accolades, and it richly deserves them. And again, so that is from Booklist starred review. All right, I want to circle back to Peter. So you took us on a slow deterioration of Peter. So once he gets Vasil's case, he forgets to take notes at his meeting. He's misplacing his keys. He's missing his train stop. He's bringing the wrong files to court. And I'm sure there were other subtle things that I missed. But something I didn't miss, Adam, was his borderline obsession with furniture. Right around the time he had his vertigo, he comes to the conclusion that the furniture in his apartment no longer fit together. And sort of throughout the story, he has comments about his own furniture and other people's furniture. Was that meant to be a metaphor for something?
I don't even know if it was a metaphor. I mean, I appreciate you catching these subtleties. It is satisfying because I do think about it. Um, I think it's the way that we apprehend the physical world around us so often is just total habituation, right? Your own home, you walk into it, your own office, you walk into it, it's so familiar that you don't see it. You don't see the particulars of it. And Peter, because he's really doesn't attend to almost anything other than his work, he particularly doesn't notice or hasn't noticed the just literally what he's living around, the apartment that he's in, the furniture that's there. And when he begins to have more vivid recall of his own life, past life, and kind of, in a sense, gets more and more in touch with his own feelings, then it's like he's looking around and being like, wait, what's this? Where am I? What is this stuff? And at one point, it sort of appears to him as nothing more than the settings on stage. You know what I mean? Like stage furniture. And to me, that was a way of getting at just the extremity of his non-presence in his own life. You know what I mean? That in a sense, this whole thing has just been a stage.
Oh, interesting. Okay. No, I didn't think of it that way. That's excellent. So then now circling back to Anne, she seems intentionally turning away from the past. A quote of hers, and hopefully I got this quote right. If we don't live in the present, we're really not living. Something to that effect, anyway. She's not interested in Liz's quest to understand her genealogy. And more explicitly, she says she hardly thinks about Peter's childhood traumatic event. So, what do you make of Anne's turn towards meditation and her intense focus on the present? Is it some sort of coping mechanism for her? And is this a skill that should be cultivated?
You don't ask easy questions. Um, so there's a lot there. It's, I mean, I think it's all of the above, right? Meditation has a very important part of my own life. I spend a lot of time, I meditate before I write every day. It's, yeah, so it is a contemplative practice, and for the same reasons that I was talking about reading being such a balm in a world where our attention is so divided, I think meditation provides that. But I think it can also be somewhere to hide. I think there's a sense in which you are withdrawing from the world, and there can be benefits to that, but it can also be a way to shut things off. So I think it's both things for Anne. I think because she is more present through meditation and the sort of spiritual discernment and intuition that she has, she provides a lot for other people, because the women that come to the center, she really is a guide, and her own state of being helps them to be in a certain state of being. But one of the subjects of the book is the way in which nothing's ever simple or perfect, and her, she's not always able to apply that same presence to herself or her own family.
Yeah. Well said. So another line, now I'm like hesitant to say the lines because I think I've messed them up. But another line in the book that stood out to me was when Peter was talking about his asylum clients. He said, there's a lot of violence. They don't want to remember, but that's what I do. I make them remember. And yet he himself didn't want to remember his own childhood trauma. His colleague Charlie says something to the effect of, people don't remember facts, they remember stories. And so was there supposed to be an irony in all of that? And is there also an irony in the profession for both Peter and Anne? They're constantly having to have difficult conversations with strangers, whether it be asylum seekers or women at the retreat center, yet they both struggle to listen and talk to each other for more than a decade. So was this all irony that we were supposed to be detecting?
I mean, I don't even know so much irony as it is kind of the story I'm telling, you know? I mean, if this was the kind of, if in novels you had titles like they do in nonfiction with a colon and then a subtitle, one of the subtitles could have been like The Psychic Life of Liberalism. You know, I mean, these are people who are both in a sense in helping professions, who have in a way hidden themselves inside the stories of the people they're trying to help. So that is definitely a theme of the book. And no, it's not a coincidence at all, I think, that Peter is in the business of making other people remember while not remembering himself. I mean, I think this is one of the things about psychic material in your own mind that if you haven't come to understand how it's shaped you, you're much more likely to repeat it, right? I mean, this is Freud and Nietzsche and many others. But so, you know, I mean, we all know like a person at work who comes in and behaves in a certain way, and you're like, is this really about what's going on in work? Or might this be about something else? And so I think, yeah, and in many ways, again, about the slowing down, like when I'm doing character work with fiction, I'm trying just to take you into the very granular experience of that and how people misperceive themselves and then come to see themselves.
So I have one more question for you, Peter, and then I'm going to read the publisher's weekly starred review. And then we're going to get to the audience questions. And I think the audience questions, we're going to talk a bit about your writing style and writing process. But my final question to you, and give as little or as much as you'd like, but how much of Peter do you see in yourself? You're both gay. You grew up in suburban Massachusetts in the 80s. You lost your fathers while you were a young age. You both now live in New York. You're successful professionals with law degrees. Are these coincidences? Were some of the plot developed based on your own personal lived experiences?
No, I just Googled. I Googled it all. I have no, no. There's certainly a lot of me and Peter. I mean, I've thought about this for years in when I'm writing. I mean, one of the things you do when you create a character, I mean, there's a lot of me in Anne too, right? As a meditator and someone who likes to be kind of contemplative and somewhat hermit-like. But when you write, at least for me, when you're dramatizing something and writing a character, you often take an element and then you imagine what would that element be if the volume were turned up on it even more. You know what I mean? If it was even more central a part of a character's life. So certainly, I lived in New York. I as a single gay man, experienced the kind of solitude and loneliness that sometimes went along with that. And I don't know if I'm an overworker, but I do focus very intently on my work. So there's, I do think that for me, I'm lucky to say that much of the writing that I've done, particularly the last two books, has in a way been cathartic. And I think there were things about, I mean, the mother in this story is not very much like my mother at all. It's actually bears much more resemblance to the mother of a good friend of mine. But as for Peter, yeah, there's certainly an identification there.
All right, so let me read the final star review, and then we'll get to the audience questions. So Publishers Weekly called the book irresistible. Themes of guilt, new beginnings, survival, and violence permeate the excellent and subtle story of characters grappling with events beyond their control, and the author delivers a deeply personal portrait of Peter's tenacious advocacy for his clients. This matches the heights of Haslett's best work. So that is from Publishers Weekly. Okay, so if you don't believe me, believe them. All right, so now we're going to get to some audience questions. This question comes from Dan. He says, I'd be curious to hear about Adam discuss his approach to structure and form the novel. When did he decide to bounce back and forth between Peter and Anne?
So I tried writing the scenes between Peter and his mother from Peter's first person point of view, which is in a way the majority of the book. And they just didn't work for me, those scenes, because there was something stiff about them, because there was too much about Anne that Peter wouldn't know. So from a first person point of view, it was just hard to get to. And as soon as I just gave myself permission and started writing Anne's scenes from her own point of view, I was like, oh, wow, there's so much more here. There's this whole other life and character. And so I just delved into her, but it was not it was a discovery along the way. I had originally imagined the entire book would be in Peter's point of view.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And so Peter was like present tense first person, and Anne
Yes.
was generally past tense third person. Thought that was interesting as well.
Yeah. It
Okay,
was,
so yeah.
a little bit.
Amanda wants to know, I'm interested that you took years to write this. Were you waiting for certain elements of the plot to unfold, or was the entire book plotted in advance?
It was certainly not plotted in advance. I write sequentially and very slowly and kind of edit as I go. So, I mean, I didn't the way that publishing works and so on. It's not that every year. I started the book probably in 2019, so it took a little. I wasn't writing it all of the years in between the two books, but what takes the most time to me is literally just the prose, because so much of what I'm doing is trying to find the rhythm in the language that captures the way that someone thinks and experiences themselves. And so, and I think if you think about books that you love and great writing, it's usually not the plot that is the reason we're pressing a great book on someone, right? We're pressing it on them because there's something about the representation itself which transports you. So I'm always trying to find that rhythm. And once you do that, that takes a long time. And then the whole thing actually has to work within that rhythm. So in a sense, it's the what takes the longest is the writing itself. I don't know how else to put it.
Yeah. We spent 53 minutes talking about the characters in the plot, but no one does prose better than you, Adam. It's so true. And, there's no doubt in my mind that you're going to be receiving nominations and awards for this book, as you've done the past 3 books that you've written. Not like the way, and I can't convey it in this interview format, but like the way you write, the way I read what you write, it really is something special. I also wanted to let you know, Adam, I'm not sure if you read this in the chat, but your former high school your high school English teacher, Mrs. Goddard, is in the chat from Wellesley High School. Okay. How about that? Small world.
Hello, Jeannie, and thank you.
There you go. So Sarah says, Sarah's touching on one of your prior books. So Sarah says, I'm so enjoying this book thus far, and I'm finding the retreat center incredibly calming and exactly what I need right now. I wanted to share how much I appreciated Imagine Me Gone and how much I sobbed after and how poignant the family story felt as a therapist myself. I'm curious if you were surprised by the response and how you felt leaving those characters behind.
Well, thank you for the question. And before I get there, I do just want to say that I wouldn't be sitting here today talking to you about writing in quite the way I am, were it not for Jeannie Goddard, who is in the audience. It's not just, you often hear about the enthusiasm for books, and she had that more than anybody I've met. But it's also the connection between enthusiasm and language, the particulars of the language. Yeah, I'm forever indebted. Imagine Me Gone, you asked a moment ago about my most autobiographical, or about the autobiographical relation between me and Peter. Imagine Me Gone was, in a way, more autobiographical about that family. As you mentioned, my father died when I was 14, committed suicide. And my brother, unfortunately, also died young. So that was a book in some ways that I had to write. It was a fictionalization, certainly. I took a lot of liberties. In order to make something into a work of art, you've got to depart from reality. And in many ways, I mean, I do write realist fiction. It's funny, one of the recent reviews talked about it as an example of realism. And on the one hand, yes, I certainly, as a stylistic matter, it's not highly modernist, it's not obscure, it's not fantasy, it's not speculative, all sorts of other things. But I actually do think of them as fables, because in the end it is art. They are shapely in the way that a short story is shapely. Life doesn't operate the way short stories operate, right? And life doesn't really operate the way novels do. And so there is, in putting something into the form of a story, I am creating a beginning and a middle and an end, which we don't experience our lives as, right? Our lives are always ongoing. So whether I missed the characters in Imagine Me Gone, I missed writing the comic scenes of the brother Michael, because in a way it was a way to ventriloquize my own brother. And so I miss spending time with him in those scenes. Yeah.
So Adam, we've reached the end of our hour. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you wish I had asked you? Anything you want to say to the audience before we wrap things up?
Well, no, I'm just very appreciative for everybody for being here, and also to you for the very, very detailed questions and the close reading. So I thank you for that and for all of it.
So folks, let's give Adam a big virtual round of applause for a great conversation. For those watching live, look for an email from me tomorrow with a link to the recording, as well as information about some other upcoming virtual programs that might be of interest. Adam's books are obviously available worldwide, wherever you can purchase books, but we highly recommend you buy a book through Wellesley Bookstore, our official bookstore partner. All books purchased through them do help sustain this series. So Adam, wonderful job as always. I look forward to going back in time and reading your previous 3 books, but no doubt we'll be hearing about more accolades for you in the months to come. So thank you all so much, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their night.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye-bye. Good night.